Welcome, welcome dear colleagues, and welcome to our workshop today, SDG7 by 2030, Accelerating Action on Energy Access. This workshop today is hosted by the Global Covenant of Mayors exhibition booth, as you can all see, and this session is organized by ICLEI, Local Government for Sustainability, which is one of the proud founding members of the GCoM Alliance. My name is Giorgia Rambelli. I'm the coordinator for climate policy and energy governance at the European Secretariat of ICLEI, and it will be my pleasure to moderate and chair the discussion of today. So it is increasingly clear that a transition to a sustainable, fair, and resilient energy system is key to accelerate the implementation of the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And of course, the achievement of SDG 7, trying to ensure as quickly and as much as possible access that is affordable, reliable, sustainable to modern energy for all, is an essential milestone of this process. Cities are home to more than half of the global population, and they account for around 75% of global final energy consumption. They are therefore essential when it comes to achieving this transition. As the closest level to citizens, they are not only administrators, but they lead by example. They provide also a variety of key services to the community that they represent. So for cities and local governments, being able to ensure access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy for their community, including in particular the most vulnerable part of such population, is essential. It is not only a goal, but it is also a key indicator, which often marks a clear threshold for quality of life. So for example, when we talk about energy today, we talk about more energy efficient building. Access to clean energy means better, safer living conditions, healthier occupants in our dwellings. Less energy demand does not mean only less energy. It also helps to address and reduce the risk of the impact of energy poverty. When we have lack of access to modern electricity, which, by the way, affects 13% of the global population, this impact is directly felt on jobs, but also on access to education. And then finally, when we talk about upscaling renewable energy beyond the electricity sector, so looking into also the potential in heating, cooling, transport, this can help increase access, but also strengthen the resilience of our system, while also providing an avenue for the community to be included, to directly engage in the energy transition. So true, today we are talking about energy, but at the core, we're talking about sustainable development at large. So because of the key role the cities are playing in this specific moment, the key juncture in which they are finding themselves to leverage the momentum where we can reduce energy demand to further develop and upscale sustainable energy measures and solutions, but also benefiting as much as possible of the renewable energy sources that are available within their own territory, and to develop plans that can help reinvest these gains, these benefits within the community that they serve. So there is good news. Of course, it's a very tall order, but there is a good news. So cities and local governments are already aware of the great potential and have been spearheading this process for a while now. They have been setting bold targets when it comes to renewable energy, but also net zero targets, while trying also to create at the same time healthier, more livable urban environment, transforming their community with renewable energy. There is also, unfortunately, a bad news. And the bad news is that as today's rate of progress, the world is still not on track to achieve the goals of SDG 7 by 2030. And lack of clear mandates for cities and local governments, the so much needed alignment and vertical integration between local, regional, national level when it comes to policies, but also to actions, are still some of the key challenges that are hampering the rollout of a just and inclusive energy transition at the pace and at the scale that it's needed. So today's session is really trying to discuss these challenges, and in particular, it wants to debunk also some of the barriers that I have already started listing for you today. We will discuss different drivers, technological driver, option for finance, knowledge available, but also policy and governance, and how they can all together work to help us developing bankable projects for our future, while also hearing to some key inspiring example, implemented real-life examples that are coming straight from the ground for us to reflect upon and to exchange upon. So I will not be alone in the exploration of today. I will be accompanied in our journey of discussion by a number of outstanding speakers, and I'm joined here on our stage virtually by Mr. Shwetal Shah. He's a technical advisor for the Climate Change Department of the Government of Gujarat. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Shwetal Shah. But also here in person with me, I have the pleasure to be joined by Lauren Sorkin. She's the Executive Director of Resilient Cities Network. Thank you for being with us, Lauren. And by Leah Ranalder. She's an Associate Program Management Officer at UN Habitat. And then last but not the least, I will be joined by my dear colleague, Roy Zen, the Head of Sustainable Energy at the ICLEI World Secretariat based in Bonn in Germany. Now, before we get started, I want to really stress that we want to hear from you. We have different ways to be able to do so. First of all, of course, I want to encourage the audience here in our room, following live our discussion, to please note down your questions, but also your ideas, your insights, everything that you want to share with us today. We will have a number of opportunities to talk directly with you and with our panelists. But also, I want to hear from, of course, our colleagues on the line. And in particular, there is a chat live on YouTube as well as on the WebEx setup that we have for our webinar. So please do make use of the opportunity also to post your questions and post your insight there. We need bold action, I said. We need bold ideas, so please do not hesitate to share them with us today. So now, to get us started, I will give the floor to my colleague, Roy Zen. I already introduced him, to tell us a little bit, how is SDG7 really doing? Can you set the scene a little bit for us, Roy, of what we can expect for the future of implementation? What is going on? Any open question that you see that we will have to address while we are here at the World Urban Forum, and to bring home, of course, to continue working together on. So, Roy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Georgia, and good day to you all. What I'm trying to do here is, through my presentation, set the scene and try to show where we are with SDG7, what are the gaps that we see today, and where are the points where we can accelerate the action. Moving on, can I? Okay, so let's look at SDG7 1.1. We still have 733 million people without the access of electricity, where they are not able to access the basic needs, the basic socio-economic needs. At the same time, the COVID impact had slowed down the progress, and 100 million connections per year is required to reach SDG7 by 2030. SDG7 1.2, looking at clean cooking, access to clean cooking. We see here 2.4 billion continue to still use traditional biomass. We also see that household air pollution is still creating a lot of health problems. And we see that almost 2% of the GHG emissions that are coming from this harvesting and unsustainable work that combustion creates from the clean cooking, not having access to clean cooking. Looking at SDG 7.2.1, which is looking at the renewable share for final energy consumption. Here we have 30% of the total final energy consumption from renewables, which is still a lot lower. We see that decentralized energy solutions have been key to whatever that we have achieved so far, especially with solar home systems, solar mini-grids, and so on. And at the same time, tackling the climate action, SDG 7, this is something that also has contributed to socioeconomic outcomes. At the moment, we see that 17.7% of the total final energy consumption is coming from renewables as of 2019. This is an interesting graph that I found from IEA, International Energy Association, which shows in different regions what are the resources being used from comparison between 1990 levels and 2019 levels, where we can easily see that in most of the developing countries, the use of traditional biomass and non-renewable energy sources is still pretty high, and we need to cover this gap. Moving on to SDG 3.1 on energy efficiency. Here also there is a lot of work that needs to be done. We have seen that the annual improvements in energy efficiency will need to accelerate the achievement of SDG 7 overall, and a clear role of renewable energy with considerable lower emissions and losses is something that is utmost important. At the same time, digitalization of most of the services and products is something that is very important to look at how energy efficiency can play its role and also reduce the energy consumption. Now, looking at SDG 7, A1.1, which is looking at international public finance flow, and this is kind of interesting. So, still not enough finance for global renewable energy investments. This is something that we all know, but we don't know that in 2021 we only had US dollars equivalent of 367 billion that had flown in, out of which we can already see in the last 2 years or so, the public finance has already decreased, and we already see in most of the SDG 7 projects off-grid with distributed renewable energy, private sector investments still make up the bulk of it, which is where we ask the question what the public finance can be used for then, in an innovative way perhaps. Now, those were some shots or glimpses at the points where we look at SDG 7 and bifurcate it in the various layers that SDG 7 has. The gaps that we identified. What are the things that we can do now to accelerate action on SDG 7 to at least achieve it by 2030? Let's look at finance. We know that there is a huge financial gap. There needs to have a lot of flow from global north to global south. Can the public and private finance work together? That's the question we need to talk about and discuss. Almost 85% of the investments need to go to new and renewable energy projects. That has happened. Can the public funds, which I already showed you in the last slide, were not coming in as competitive to the private sector funds, can that be used in an innovative way to look at how data and monitoring can be improved? Can the public financing be used to de-risk the projects to create an investment-friendly environment for attracting more investment? Can the public finance be used for divesting from non-renewable resources? Looking at policy and governance. Now, here we need to think how multi-level governance can work and how cross-sectoral policy making can facilitate the action. We also need to see what role that the community level, the stakeholders at the community level can play. And here is the point where local governments from cities, municipalities, and other subnational layers come into the picture. Something that we need to discuss and see what we can bring in, creating awareness as well. Another point where we see actions can be accelerated is looking at infrastructure and technology. Here we have already seen that decentralized renewable energy projects have been the pick of most of the stakeholders. We've also seen that the scope of developing the supply chain and the line of equipments and major manufacturing developing skills is something that has the potential and can be worked on further. We can also see the upside of climate action, where decentralized renewable energy projects, the way it has been implemented in a modular way, can also build in resilience and adaptation. What else are we doing? Are we building partnerships? So this is where we are looking at the recently launched energy compacts through UN Energy. ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, has already launched an energy compact where we are trying to mobilize and motivate local governments to commit to 100% renewables, which also has the target of achieving SDG7 by at the latest by 2030. Can we make more energy compacts and work together on such kind of partnerships is the question. Now, some of the guiding questions which the moderator will take forward will discuss and look at what kind of innovation that can be talked about, both finance, technology, knowledge, etc. What kind of what kind of mitigate potentials that we have that impacts the society in an adverse way. What kind of bankable projects we need to look at, what kind of investors need to come in from impact to social investors and so on, what kind of adaptation goals, and also how to use human capital. I, from here, keep the questions and the discussions open and give it back to you, Georgia, to discuss with the panel and see how we can address these issues moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rohit, for the very good presentation and for helping us set the scene. I think there are some interesting data that are a little bit elaborated further, not to what we started already discussing, this idea of energy and how it impacts on our daily life beyond just the emission side. You mentioned these 2.4 billion people with no access to clean cooking, just to bring it down to the reality of our day-to-day life. You also mentioned how only 17.7% share of final energy consumption is actually by renewables, which is much lower than what we expected. And I know that that specific indicator is something where we felt renewables are making an amazing stride, and we are really moving forward with that concept, but there is still a lot of work to be done. So I hope we can dig a little bit more further also in this specific topic. And then finally, of course, the biggest of the barriers when it comes to talking, I think, about what we need to do to enable this transition. We talk always about the money side of things, right? This access to finance and the idea that not only we are not quite close to what we need by any means, but also even the investment from the public perspective seems to be gradually decreasing. So again, we need innovation, as you mentioned, and indeed that's the first question that we want to discuss about today. Try to see what are the drivers and how can we use innovation to a little bit set ourselves up more for success in the future. But before I go to the panel and ask my first question around this, I promised you that we wanted to hear your ideas and we wanted to hear your comments and we wanted to hear your thoughts about the discussion of today. So I would like to launch the first question for our audience to be able to respond to. I believe that the colleagues will be able to share online a QR code now that will be showing access to all of you to the question that you can respond via your phone, your tablet, or your laptop. That's the QR code that you can see. You can utilize, you can go to menti.com and use the code that you can see right now and answer for us the question, what are the barriers to accelerating action to, on energy access according to you, according to your experience? So please do share some thoughts from your side, some keywords, and we will come back to all of you to see if our panel agrees with your ideas or if there is anything else that we need, of course, to discuss even further. So I would like now to maybe ask the first question, and I would invite maybe Mr. Shah online to, if it's possible, to give us his first thoughts about this. And by the way, Mr. Shah, let me say that thank you very much for connecting from a different time zone, but in particular, we are very sorry that you couldn't be here with us in person. But we wanted to hear from you, what kind of innovation, technological innovation, finance innovation, new ways to learn and to share and to increase our knowledge. What type of governance innovation do we need, in your opinion, to accelerate the renewable energy transition to achieve SDG 7 goals by 2030? Can you share with us your thoughts? Checking with the colleagues if it's possible to have him online. Okay.
Could you check your camera? Great.
Well,
Am
hello. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, thank you, Miss Georgia, and the uh, also thank you for the very brief and crisp background presentation. So, energy access is one of the very key point when we talk about global south. So, the global south has the opportunity to develop in a way so that we have less GHG intensive energy and also energy equity and energy access to everyone. As far as India is concerned, in recent time we have achieved almost 100% energy access to our people. If I talk about my state of Gujarat, then we have achieved it before almost 10 years, and we have also achieved energy access to most remotest places in the state, including the island, because we have 1600-kilometer long coastline, and we have many islands on our coastline in the state of Gujarat, and to have energy access to those places is a really challenging thing. However, the government of Gujarat, with the help of all the distribution companies of energy, we have achieved it. Also, we discussed about the penetration of renewable energy in our grid. So, as far as Gujarat state is concerned, we have the highest percentage of renewable energy in our total installed capacity, which is presently around 17 gigawatt, comprising both solar energy as well as wind energy. So we have plenty of the natural resources to harness wind energy as well as solar energy, and uh, best utilization of this renewable sources of energy is happening. Even in future, we have the scope of things like tidal energy when it becomes practically viable and financially and economically uh, equivalent to the other sources of energy. Gujarat was the first state in 2019 to declare that we will have no new coal-based power plant. So that is also one of the major commitment of the state of Gujarat towards the clean energy sources. Along with energy access, we have also taken lead in distribution of LED lamps and LED lighting, so that the energy efficiency is also achieved while we have the energy access. So basically, the basic amenities at the household level should have been catered. Also, people use earlier, as told in the presentation, that biomass was used in the cooking as a cooking fuel. Whereas right now, through the Ujjwala Yojana, that is the Ujjwala scheme of Government of India, all households are now given clean sources of fuel like piped natural gas or liquefied natural gas. Though it is a source from fossil fuel, but it is cleaner than other fossil fuel. So that is also having a better health impact to the people at the household level. So SDG 7 is very important for our country and our state, because our population is vulnerable to various adversities, natural calamities, and also the impact of climate change. Therefore, we require to provide them proper energy access to develop their own resilience and capabilities. Also, a huge work is required in terms of the uh, grid stability and grid infrastructure, which can cope up with the natural disasters like cyclone. As I told, we have 1600-kilometer long coastline. So we are vulnerable to natural disasters like heavy cyclone and windstorm and even flood sometime. So to have our energy supply, if it is sort of say underground cabling infrastructure, then we can safeguard it from those calamities. So future investment is required in those direction. Also, our windmills are mostly placed near the coastal area. So we require to also protect those sources of renewable energy. Even the rooftop and solar panels can also get damaged from those cyclonic storm. So how we can really address those things from structural stability point of view will require to be addressed. So these are some of the very important infrastructure basically required for having SDG 7 once achieved and also then to sustain it.
Thank you very much for sharing the perspective of Gujarat. And I think already we hear some very key important word when we're talking about sustainable development. You spoke about not only the importance of energy access for the global south, but in particular this notion around energy equity. And also you underlined, I think, a very important component of the sustainability approach that we can give to energy access. You highlighted how we need to harness to the best possible potential the energy that is on the ground in our communities, retained locally in order to fully tap their potential. And then finally, I think your point on the importance of the political commitment is also something that we should always remind ourselves how, of course, there is not just one solution fits all, but in any case, the political commitment is an essential step in moving forward also with the drivers for change that we need to implement these different activities. And then finally, your reflection around the vulnerability of the energy system itself, I think it's also quite important because it connects once again this idea that the energy system and the way that we provide reliable, clean energies to our community is not something that can be done in a vacuum. It's something that has to be thought through and connected with the rest of the challenges that our societies are facing. And I'm sure that we will have the opportunity to hear even more about what Gujarat is doing and how it's providing these responses that are more cohesive. But then maybe I would like to go to you, Leah. We kind of already started talking about all these different solutions. It's actually interesting because I talked about challenges and innovation that we need, but we already heard a number of different solutions that are actually put in place, which makes me very hopeful, no? That we are going in the right direction. So from your perspective now, taking stock of what has been done, looking at what we have not managed to achieve quite yet, what do you think? What are the type of innovation? Is it just technology? Should we stress more the part around finance? Is there a check and balance there? How would you approach innovation to meet the objectives of the SDGs number 7?
Thank you very much, Georgia, for that question. Maybe just quickly on what Rohit also said. I think these numbers are shocking. And when we see 17% of renewables in total final energy consumption, what gets me even more is that this includes traditional biomass. So if we exclude traditional biomass, we are 12%. And if we look at what has happened over the last 10 years, it is literally nothing. Reality check is the share of fossil fuels in the last 10 years in total final energy consumption has remained almost the same. At the same time, energy demand has increased 20%. What does that boil down to? We're actually burning more fossil fuels than ever. So I think, just to add that to what you said, and, completely agree with Rohit's assessment from before. And I also want to highlight again the other point when we speak about progress that has been made towards SDG 7. Yes, we've done a lot of progress in the last 10 years. COVID hit. A lot of the progress has been eradicated. And I think this is something that cannot be underlined enough, that this is an additional challenge that we're looking at. So this is now a bit of the grim picture that I'm painting, but I think it's important to really say that reality check out loud. And then also to say, yes, we hear about these record installations of renewables, but they're mainly in the power sector. Not much is happening in heating and cooling and transport. to come back to your question, sorry for that little detour, is, we speak about innovations, and I think technology innovation, there is a lot of innovation already out there. Technologies exist to facilitate electricity access, for example. I mean, there is, the colleague has already mentioned that we have solar PV, small solar PV solutions. We have these Pico Solar, we have mini grids, so there is definitely technologies that are out there to facilitate electricity access. There are also a lot of different renewable energy solutions that can help to balance the grid. But we really also need to speak about, I think one of the big elephants in the room for me is not necessarily the technology innovations, because I think solutions are out there. Yes, they can be improved. Yes, there's room for improvement. But for me, it's much more about what is happening on the governance side and on the finance side. Another big elephant in the room, fossil fuel subsidies, 5.9 trillion annually. That's $11 million per minute. We've been here 35 minutes, you can do the math. This is just a reality that's also hindering our cities, that's hindering our communities in getting this access to clean energy. And for me, lots of this is the governance issues. How can we empower cities to really to help in that process, to help facilitate energy access? How can cities work together with rural communities to facilitate this access? What's the role of cities in the entire discussion on the energy transition? What are some best practices that are out there? And they exist. But how can we make them more well known? And then, of course, always the discussion about finance. There is not enough money coming to cities to help make that happen, and there's not enough money coming to anybody, but specifically also to cities. And I think there is a big opportunity. And if we speak about providing energy access, it's not only a climate change mitigation effort. I think in a city what can come together is these benefits that are going beyond just climate change mitigation, but linking adaptation, resilience, mitigation in one place, thinking about the urban poor and the vulnerable communities, and how we can make sure that they are part of this journey. And I think cities can be the strongest allies in this journey. I'll stop here. I could go on forever.
Thank you very much, Lea. No, that makes that. You're right, it was not a positive picture, but I think it's important to have serious conversation and honest conversation about where we stand and better understand where we are supposed to head. So I think both you and Roy made a very strong case for the fact that, we have an SDG 7, but we still have to work so much to implement it. And I think your point on the big elephant in the room is also giving us very much a reality check. So we are striving to make change from 2030. We are looking for a systemic change, but in reality, maybe not all the bases for such systemic change are there. And this is true from the financial point of view, but also from a multi-level governance or a governance point of view, as you were saying. I would like maybe to ask Lauren then the same question. So we have discussed here a little bit about these different barriers. Clearly, the idea around the technologies that is available, the big gap in finance. But if you had to see how, for example, the resilience aspect has been taken into account in the implementation of the SDGs. Is this something that you have seen happening from your perspective, at least from the city perspective, for example? What other barriers do you still happening there? And maybe also a quick reflection on what is the actual cost of inaction by not thinking about this resilience?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me on the panel. Thanks to ICLEI and thanks to GCoM for convening this important panel. I think I couldn't agree more with the points you were making, that cities are acting within a global system. And right now, it's a pretty difficult system to be acting in because the financial and policy incentives are not really stacked in favor of meeting this goal in the time that we need to. I mean, as someone who's been working in the cities and climate change space now for more than 20 years, I can say that it has been a bit of a frustrating trajectory. When we looked at what was happening in the early 2000s with the carbon markets, it was a positive story. And then that market bottomed out. So a lot of the great momentum that we had behind energy efficiency and renewables and the transition of technologies from countries to other countries and that sharing of knowledge and best practice slowed down, right? Almost to a halt in certain places. And so cities have had to try to do their work really in spite of these huge challenges. And you know, we're sitting here in beautiful Katowice, not very far from Ukraine, and we are sitting here at a time when we're watching, even in Europe, right, fossil fuels coming back online to replace gas from Russia that's coming offline. And who would have thought that would be the conversation we were having when we were back together in Glasgow last year? It's not the conversation we thought we would be having. We didn't think we'd be having a conversation about, you know, gas tax in the US being repealed, you know, to give people financial relief. But the reality is that we have policymakers that are responding to price sensitivities in the market in the current global context that we have. Now, what's happening in terms of cities? I've very rarely met any mayor, not just in our Resilient Cities network, but in any city, who doesn't want to meet these goals of energy access for their entire city, who doesn't want to make a more positive change for future generations. The question is, how can they do this when they're up against these global challenges, and how can we integrate resilience into the conversation? The way that we have seen cities do this in the most effective way is actually very similar to what our colleague from Gujarat State was talking about, is taking a holistic perspective in terms of what are the energy needs of my city, what are my risks, do I have cyclones, do I have earthquakes, what are those factors, and also, very importantly, what are the economic challenges, right? And what are the opportunities for my community to create new green jobs, right, around these efforts. So where we've seen resilience being integrated into these projects and where we see a lot of opportunity is in distributed renewable energy. And I think that that solution as an investment and as an opportunity area specifically for cities is something that is generally within the realm of possibility and an area where cities can actually do more in terms of creating incentives and then learning from successful opportunities. We've seen some very interesting action in Melbourne. We've seen some very interesting action in New York, where we've seen the distributed renewables are increasing. And there's a real community engagement aspect of this as well that empowers consumers in terms of feed-in, in terms of being part of the energy solution. So I think when we look at what those kinds of resilience opportunities are, we see a lot of opportunity in the distributed renewable space. And we see more and more the opportunity to tap on public-private partnerships in cities themselves, where if a city's leadership is able to create a policy and show that that's a priority for them, they can then welcome in the private sector solutions. And I agree with you, there's a lot of solutions on the market that are available. So in order to welcome those in, having that clear and consistent policy agenda that says we want to have distributed renewables, we want that as part of not just an energy transition, but a resilience journey to make our city more able to respond to the shocks and stresses that they may face. That's what we're seeing as an area of growth in a silver lining at a very cloudy time.
Thank you very much, Lauren, for your reflection. I think you also painted another picture that has some additional reality check. You mentioned the current geopolitical situation in which we are finding ourselves and this slowing down of some of the processes that we felt kind of kick-started, but somehow now seem to have hit another halt to a certain extent. You also mentioned the great potential around distributed renewable energy, and I think that is essential indeed. Energy communities are growing in Europe, are growing across the world, and I think part of the specific interest is also coming from the fact that communities, citizens, people want to be part of the solution and be part of the one that are investing in the sustainable future for their own cities, for their own community, for their own even climate planning implementation. So definitely it's something that it allows also not only to build upon more technical solution and financial solution by reinvesting locally, but also really to embrace this more aspect of social engagement. And maybe continuing on that specific point, I would like to ask maybe to all the panel, perhaps starting from Mr. Shai again on the line. We talked about the potential of engaging communities, activating them, bringing them along, and the benefits that this can bring. But what are the kind of actions that you feel should be taken when it comes to mitigate instead potential adverse impacts on society during this transition? So the situation right now, we talked about the current geopolitical situation. The COVID pandemic was another moment in which we had alternate and competing maybe priorities on the ground. How can we make sure that the transition that we want to see happening does not weigh on the shoulder of who is already maybe more vulnerable within these overall processes? So, Mr. Shah, maybe I can ask your comment first. I'm not sure if you can hear us online.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Okay. Thank you, Georgia, again. Energy access, and after it comes energy security. So energy security is also a very important concern for India as a country and Gujarat as a state. And as we all know that recent geopolitical situation in Middle East, Russia and this part has again make us vulnerable along with the other things. Particularly in India, 2022 last May month of the present year has been the historic in terms of the demand. So before COVID time, the highest peak demand of energy at a time was around 165 to 170 gigawatt, which has increased to 205 and in between 205 and 210 gigawatt. So this is the energy demand scenario that we have observed in the present situation, and therefore it is very important for us to understand and ensure that we have uninterrupted energy supply to the nation and to the economy, so that our socio-economic stability that we want in the region remain so, and energy is backbone for all our activities. To support this energy security thing, we have now made plans for aggressive installation of renewable energy in times to come in India. So we have the target of 500 gigawatt of installed capacity of renewable energy in India by year 2030. And Gujarat will contribute at least 50 gigawatt of those installed capacity. So we will increase from our 17 gigawatt as of now to some 50 gigawatt in 4 to 5 years coming time. So basically we have 30 gigawatt world's biggest renewable energy solar wind hybrid plant that is coming up in the Kutch region of Gujarat. Also, we are aggressively moving in solar rooftop. So we have one of the best solar rooftop scheme that is happening in Gujarat. So we are right now number one, and in installation of solar rooftop at household level, and government is providing subsidy for this solar rooftop installation. So it is very wise investment by individual if they go for solar rooftop. That will not only save their energy bills, but also will contribute in reduction of their emission at the household level or whatever places they install solar rooftop, because it is also very good for the grid that you have power coming up from the downstream. So there are technical advantages of having decentralized distribution of solar rooftop. So we have achieved some 2 gigawatt of installed capacity only from the rooftop, that is highest in the country, and from the state of Gujarat is number one presently in entire country, and more than 350,000 household level installation has happened in Gujarat so far, and some 700 empaneled agencies are involved. So before 5 years, there used to be only 16 empaneled agencies, and now it is 700. So we can think that how many green jobs has also been created in this sector. So mitigation will also happen from the transition in transport sector. So we have introduced the electric vehicle policy in 2021 from the state of Gujarat, and we started from climate change department in 2015 to incentivize the basic models of electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers with the subsidy, and now we have also covered electric four-wheelers. So the growth is enormous, like at the level of 50-60% compound annual growth rate CAGR. The sector is getting developed. So again, energy is required in EVs. So from household level, they will again charge their vehicles at the houses, at the premises, or at the offices. So again, the energy demand from for those things will also say have burden on the grid, and ultimately grid is now getting transformed to the say new and renewable sources of energy. So battery storage, green hydrogen are also future things that is coming up. Even energy consumption in the industry is also required to be now have transitioned towards the cleaner sources. So these are the avenues in which mitigation has a huge scope, and this type of smaller steps which we may like to say right now, but these baby steps are getting converted to mainstreaming of the actions, and now people understand, like I told, that LED bulb is now at par with the conventional things. So people now go with LED bulb. Similar is with the case of solar rooftop. So average people understand it and they really want to install it. Then even electric two-wheelers are getting familiar to the people. So whatever new vehicle they are buying, they are trying to compare it with the electric scooter, particularly in two-wheeler segment. So these are some of the good examples that we can really visualize in the state of Gujarat. And these are also giving us advantage in terms of air quality in our cities. So when we have more electric vehicles and also use of public transport based on electric, like we have metro coming up in city of Ahmedabad, we already have BRT wherein we use electric buses. So that is also giving some advantage to our air quality management. We also have waste to energy plants installed in the state of Gujarat. So again, mitigation is happening in waste management, as well as it is the waste is getting converted into the energy. So these are some of the very key policies and very good examples that we have visualized in last 2-3 years of COVID time, wherein people have given more priority to such choices which are sustainable, which are economically viable, and which are socially acceptable.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience, and not only for talking to us about how you are mainstreaming these different solutions into and across different climate policies the Gujarat is implementing, but also for reflecting upon the co-benefits that these measures necessarily need to be connected to, and also how they can support across the board the implementation of more sustainable society on the ground. One thing that I find quite interesting would be to explore a little bit further why did Gujarat decide to invest so massively its effort into this type of activities, and maybe I'll come back to you to ask that question later to see if we can also ask other your opinion and your suggestion to others that might want to follow on similar pathway to bold commitments on how to implement this action, but also how we talk about all of these great examples and measures that are being implemented on the ground. I think both of you actually mentioned it, how there are a lot of very good examples on the ground. So my question maybe would be, how do we make sure that now they go to scale, to the scale that we actually need for implementation? But before we move to that question, I want now to take the opportunity to have a look at what our colleagues and friends following us online have been doing, how they have been sharing their thoughts in our word cloud format, the different results of the questions that was asked to all of you. What are the barriers to accelerating action on energy access? We want to see what some of these results are, and while the colleagues put up the results of the word cloud, it's my pleasure now to welcome our last but by no means least panelist of today. Please take a seat with us. We are now joined, and thank you for joining us. I know you had a different speaking engagement, so we are very glad to have you. Mayor Manuel de Araújo is the mayor of the Quelimane municipality for Mozambique, and also the vice chair of ICLEI Africa. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us. You came after we discussed a little bit what type of innovation and what type of barriers do we still see on the ground to accelerate the implementation of the different goals of SDG 17. We had a bit of a stark picture coming on the ground. We were very realistic, trying to look into the fact that we still have a long way to go to implement these SDGs. And we also asked the colleagues on the line to tell us what they feel that the barriers still are. But maybe before we go to the results, maybe you want to share with us a reflection on what type of measure, what type of solution, what type of do you think we still need urgently to put in place to overcome the barriers to energy action?
Thank you very much, and please allow me to apologize for coming late. As I said, I had another engagement. I mean, I want to bring a really picture of what is happening in the global south, and specifically from my own city and from my own country. And the first point I want to make very clear is that we need to change the way we approach the whole issue of SDG 17. One, because local governments, local mayors, they do not have enough information, basic information about what is expected from them. I know because I do understand these conferences, but most of my colleagues, they are not aware of the challenges of what the national government signed in Paris. There is no trickle down. There is no transfer of information about what are the commitments that the government made abroad and for this fact at Paris with the Paris Agreement. So mayors are on their day-to-day activities not being aware that the world is expecting them to take certain steps in this relation. So to me, that's very basic. We need to share information. We need to let people know about those commitments. Then once they know, we can make a kind of an assessment. Because people, I mean, of course, my colleagues, they are worried about providing electricity. But they don't link these with the Paris Agreement commitments. And therefore, it's very difficult to assess what is being done there on the ground. The second, after sharing information, to me, it will be training. Most of the global south local governments don't have enough qualified people to face the challenges that we are facing. So one, we have the information. so that they know what the world is expecting and what the commitments are. Second, we provide training to qualify their workers or to re-qualify them so that to be able, so that we can speak the same language. Because here we are saying things, but on the ground, in most of the countries, I mean, the discourse is completely different. And the third then will be to providing access to partner that could share resources with them. And by resources, I mean first human resources, which will be then used to qualify those and train and transfer capacity to those at the local level, but also financial resources, so that those two transfers will allow and will equip local governments to enter into this race, because most of us, we are not in the race yet. So it's very difficult for us to achieve what is expected in 2030 or in any other dimension without. So the mantra of not leaving anyone behind is very important, because half of the local government, at least in Africa, they are left behind. They are out of this discourse, they are out of the debate. So I think we need to reframe and take care of those who, at this point, are left behind this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing this very strong perspective. Indeed, we talked a little bit about some of the barriers and the funding, and we will touch upon the funding for sure in our next round of discussion. It came up, but this need also for training and access to knowledge and resources when it comes also to capacity building. I think it's something that we had touched upon, but not stressed so strongly quite enough right now, and it's essential indeed. I also would like to ask maybe the colleagues now to see the results of all the different barriers that have been included there. And I would like maybe to ask the help of my co-moderator here, Rohit, to maybe give us a bit of a comment, Rohit, on what you see on the screen. From where I'm standing, I see finance very big and very much in the center. But what other barriers do you think people have been highlighting in particular?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Georgia. So, I mean, you can already see that finance is coming as a big point from various people putting their votes on the Mentimeter. It's not just finance, but also access to finance is a big problem. I think more than that, if you go and ask an investor, they'll say bankable projects is a big issue. So it's a whole chain that you can follow, and at the same time, the type of projects that come into the picture. So the presentation that I made, you could see that when you're moving from traditional biomass in clean cooking, they're all moving to more gas. That's not the answer. So can we move to electric cooking? Can we change the behavior, the culture, the customs of many in Global South? So those are certain important things that one needs to look at. The political will is important, as also Mayor here said, and it's quite alarming that I hear that a lot of people are still not in the race. We have this decade as UN's Decade for Action, just a few more years left to achieve SDG7. All these points are very important. I think they all are connected with each other. Yes, finance at the very end is there, but I think technology, I think bankable projects, I think access to finance, I think how to even design these projects based on what the community wants. And that is where I believe the city, the local governments, they have this unique position that they can play this important role in feeling the nerves of the people, what they want, and how they want to make this transition happen at the local level as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rohit. And I understand that online we actually have a question that actually goes in this direction, around the importance of education to also not only support local governments, but also to enable citizen participation. So I will ask maybe Karishma and Sylvia to read aloud the question for our panel, if you don't mind.
With pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone. And indeed, the question that we had is very well aligned with what have been brought to the table by Mayor Araújo and also mentioned beforehand. So if we are looking into decentralized energy, it means that indeed people will have to have an active role, but how to have them having the right tools to do that. So education is key, and what is it needed now in order to provide people, citizens, with the knowledge needed to take action. And a specific point was made also about youth, which is indeed a segment in the population that will play a great role going ahead in the future.
Maybe then I would ask my panelists here if you have any reflection, of course, on the education part and on engagement of youth, but at large on the challenges that you saw on the screen. Anything that you feel it's something that definitely is a core ingredient right now. Maybe I'll start with you, Laura.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Shah for his comments, because he made it very clear how the scale-up in India has been very successful and the vertical alignment that's critical for that. And I think the esteemed mayor made a point that where there's not that vertical alignment, where there's not outreach from nations back to their cities, it's really, really difficult to do this work. So what we saw on the screen there, governance frameworks, funding, financing, right? And there's a difference between funding and financing. And I think our audience is probably being very intentional when they put both funding and financing on the screen. There's a lot of finance for renewable energy and clean energy. There's not a lot of funding to do project preparation and the kind of capacity building to prepare the projects. So there's a very, very big gap that we see in terms of being able to prepare the projects. So what I think we see, and where we see opportunity for scale, is combining the knowledge and the funding, right? So doing outreach. And I think that as city networks, we have a role to play in channeling more and more of that funding. I know that several of us do have programs that help channel funding, whether that's the work that Resilient Cities Network is doing with the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, ICLEI as well, the Global Covenant having grant funds that we use to try to scale up, but it's a very small amount in relation to the scale of the challenge, right? So we actually really need to do a better job of linking the financial markets with the funding and the project preparation. So there are a few initiatives that I think are giving us some hope about that. One, of course, is the reform of the carbon markets, and we saw progress on those articles in Glasgow, but there's still a lot of work to do to create a really transparent system where we're putting a price on carbon and we're using that price on carbon to pay for this energy transition in cities. Now, there's a lot more education we need to do with our cities for them about how to access that work. And I think that the more that we're working together on these kinds of programming that combine the education, the knowledge piece, specifically with our city leaders and with their departments, with the departments that have to prepare the projects and then provide funding to pilot and prepare the investments, right? That's the ecosystem approach that's really required to do this work. And I think what the word cloud points out is that that ecosystem needs to be even further integrated. So the more that we can do, again, to integrate knowledge, funding, and link that to the increasing amount of finance that's available in the market, the more successful we will enable our cities to be. And I think that we have a very big challenge ahead of us to try to unlock the capital for emerging markets and to help prepare the projects. And that's where we really need to prioritize a lot of our efforts and look at where we can really unlock more and more funds for our very quickly growing cities in Asia and Africa in particular, where the infrastructure gaps are the greatest.
Thank you very much. Would you like to share also your thought, Leah?
Sure. First of all, I wanted to say congratulations to the colleague from Gujarat. I think Indian cities have really shown the way of what can be done and what has been done, and setting these ambitious targets and they are big inspiration. So thank you for all the work that you've been doing. Oh, maybe I should look into the camera. You see me better. I was looking at you on the screen. So thanks a lot for all the work that you've been doing there, and big congratulations from my side. And I wanted to bring up a couple points and build on some of these points that were in the discussion beforehand. And one of these is what you said, Lauren, beforehand. It's not only about the climate change mitigation. There are big opportunities. It's for combating air pollution, local economic development. It's for building these cities based on renewables, not only for renewable energy's sake, but really to create these greener, healthier, more livable cities. Because I think that's what it is about in the end, is having that city where people can have a healthy and good life, and providing that good living environment for people and for citizens. And seeing that as an opportunity in renewable energy and providing energy access as an opportunity to do so. And then, of course, linked with the entire resilience and adaptation debate as well. And then based on what you just said before, Mayor, it's shocking to hear that there are still so many cities that are wondering what is expected of us. And I think this goes down to how can we ensure that we take cities on that journey towards achieving the Paris Agreement. For me, if there's a country that says, okay, we have these national targets, we have a renewable energy target, we have a net zero target, I would love to see how they will work together with the different stakeholders in their country in order to make that target happening. There needs to be, cities account for approximately 3/4 of the energy consumption. So there needs to be a coordination between the national government, the regional government, the local government to really to make that transition happen, and make that transition happening in all sectors. And as a last point, and I think this is where, we are here at the World Urban Forum, COP is coming up. It would be great to see the things that we are discussing here, take them and bring them to the COP. So we make sure that these discussions are not happening in silo, that these discussions are linked, and that different levels of government understand how they can work together and really build on each other's work as well. I think I could go into the finance discussion in detail, but my colleagues have already mentioned that.
Thank you very much, Leah. Maybe then continuing a little bit on that question around finance, actually, and looking into what you were saying, Lauren, but also Manuel and Mr. Shah on the line, and Leah as well. This idea, of course, that we need to support cities to also make sure that they can unlock their full potential, prepare these bankable projects. So maybe part of my question would be, what do you think the challenge there is still? What do you think the challenge still is when it comes to developing bankable projects? Is it just about knowledge? And the second question that I would have is it a responsibility always of cities to make this project bankable? Or should we also maybe educate the financial institution and the other side of the coin to understand that return on investment should also be environmental, social, and there are other indicators that perhaps they should be more used to when it comes to sustainable development? I don't know who wants to start.
I can give a very quick response because it's practical. I want to just say three things about that. Responsibility for education and investment criteria is a very interesting question, right? Because I think we all talk about the values of our projects, but then how we actually take those values and we bring them into project finance is an interesting conversation. Resilient Cities Network, we've been very fortunate that almost for 10 years we've been working with different financial institutions and in coordination with many of the actors here and the city's Climate Finance Leadership Alliance to be developing tools that actually take specific kinds of projects, for example, energy projects, and then bring in resilience indicators. Right, so that financial institutions, and we've worked with Bank of America, we're currently working with S&P Global on this, look at those multiple benefits so that as a mayor, you can say to them, it's important to me that I create green jobs for my citizens, right? That's a criteria. That's part of the scorecard. And so we have a resilience lens for investments that we use and that we apply to energy and other sectors. We have something called the RIDE scorecard, which is resilient infrastructure, diversity, and equity. And it specifically looks at how you bring this into the project preparation discussion in a way that is coherent, but is also not very heavy, right? It's a way that can be understood and communicated as a tool, because the tool is as important as an evaluation tool and as a communication tool, so that as mayor, you can use the tool to say, these are the benefits I want, and that the financial institutions can say, these are the outcomes we're going to deliver. They will still do their due diligence. They will still look for their internal rates of return, because that's what financial institutions do. But we can bridge the gap between the value statements that leaders need and the financial kinds of indicators that financial institutions need. And it is a process of conversation, education, and collaboration.
You know, I really, sorry, I just want to jump into it because I felt so, it's really a pity that you are not yesterday at the panel where I was with the World Bank director there. And I had a fierce discussion with him because he was saying that 90% of the cities are not credit worth. And my question is, you need to change your new classical model of measuring the creditness of cities. I mean, you may measure a credit worth of a private company, of a state company, of a state, and of a city. We cannot use the same criteria because, like, the assets, the value of the assets are quite different. So you need to, I was telling him, you need to re-educate yourself and your models to understand the assets, the value entrenched in the city. There are other values than only monetary or credit or whatever that current banks are using. So this process that you are starting, I think, should be spread and actually should be taken to institutions like World Bank to educate them, because they need a re-education to understand the value, the challenge of new kinds of assets that they can then use to put in their matrix to measure the worthiness of city. The second point is that the issue about education and information, I think it's of a paramount importance, because if you don't educate, I mean, education is needed on both sides of the equation, both on the supply side and on the demand side. So we need to start a journey which involves different stakeholders if we want to achieve the results we want. But what we are saying here, we are saying this discourse is quite valid for probably the global north. The challenges in the global south are the ones that I mentioned. We are far away from this debate that we are bringing in here. So we need, again, to have a kind of a two-step system where we take those who are not yet involved and start educating them and so on. And then those who are already on board, they need another kind of education or information and so on. Because if we think that we are all on the same page, I think then we will be leaving half of the world behind. And I think my cry here is that let's reconsider. Of course, let's move with the ones who are already engaged, but let's not forget the ones who are outside of this debate. And there are many, and they can make their contributions. And second, national government are not being transparent enough with local leaders. As I said, local leaders can contribute. I don't think that there is any SDG that can be implemented in a vacuum. Most of them, they're implemented at a physical, at a geographical place. And most of those places involve local leaders. So if those local leaders are not involved, how can we achieve the result? It cannot just be a national debate. We need to involve and engage with local leaders on the channel. And actually, at the last panel at the German pavilion, we were discussing, and actually it looks like the German government is taking it on board on G7, so that all G7 countries, when they are going to international debates where these issues are discussed, they should take local leaders, so that they are part and parcel of the process and of the discussion. This is also a way of educating them. And the mayor of Mannheim is going to sit next week at the ministerial level for urbanization. So if we take that example for other areas, for energy, for climate, and so on, then I think that things will be moving. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think indeed the point is loud and clear also in terms of this need for multi-level governance as a key element in order to unlock some of the smart investment that need to be made, because it's also cost efficiency comes also by alignment. But one of the things that popped up there, and then I let you maybe also reflect upon your own idea of what the next step for bankable project is there. But one of the things that came up there is also bureaucracy and red tape when it comes to actually accelerate implementation of access to energy, of course. Do you think this is also maybe part of the challenges that we are facing when it comes to develop bankable project, for example? Or what other key element do you think we still need in order to accelerate the development of such projects?
I mean, I think for me, finance doesn't operate in a vacuum. I mean, big companies are only going to move into countries if there are strong regulatory frameworks. So for me, policy and finance are very, very interlinked. I mean, you know, you need a bankable project also needs to be somewhat profitable, so there needs to be trust and trustworthiness in policy frameworks and regulatory frameworks. I mean, the issue of the red tape, I mean, I would also argue the money is there, right? The money for renewables is there. I spoke with several investors. They're like, yeah, we are ready to invest. We don't find a project. I'm like, are you kidding me? Yeah, what does it turn out to be? They only want to invest, at least $1 billion. I'm like, well, there are so many small-scale solutions that are waiting to get financed. And they're like, well, this is way too much work. Trying to do the feasibility and all of this, because they want to have one big project where they can cut a ribbon and say, this is what we've done, instead of having many, many small projects put together. So I think there's also, on the one hand, when it comes to the bankability, I like what the mayor just said. Okay, maybe we need to think about the creditworthiness in a different way, but then also how can cities work together to pool their resources, to put their energy demands together in order to get access to finance. There's some interesting projects coming out of France right now, for example, where some mayors are now working together in order to pool their resources to have more purchasing power and to really get some projects off the ground and shift their own consumption to renewables. That's the one thing. And I think the other thing is as well, how can city governments use their own assets to shift to renewable energy, use their own rooftops, use their own rivers and so on to shift to renewables, and create those small projects that can help them to attract and shift towards a wider shift citywide. I think there is an opportunity there as well, where we can build on, first using the city as a leader and as an example to shine, in order then to push for more change citywide.
Thank you very much, Leah. And I think, of course, here we are, standing ready to also support local governments to do their pooling and bundling of their projects and everything else. But indeed, it has also to be accompanied by the willingness, also changing a little bit the way that we are thinking about these issues, not only at local government level, but also with our financial institution and private sector. So we are getting close to an end, but I would like maybe to have one more reflection from all of you. You mentioned before that it would be good to continue the conversation and to see how it leads to the COP, and how we can continue discussing about SDG7 and importance of energy access and energy poverty. So this is actually not the first session that we have to talk about energy access and energy poverty. We started a COP last year, and we started from assessing the barriers to looking into practical solution, in understanding what the drivers are. Today we wanted to focus a little bit on the implementation side, and I think that's what we have done. So I would like to challenge you, maybe with this final round of reflection, to think about what are our next steps. So we are thinking about the importance of bankable projects, how we can support our local governments in doing that, but at the same time also to leverage some of the work that is being done in engaging financial institutions. So can I get out of you one idea, one extra step that we can do moving towards the COP. So the next time we can talk about how have we actually made bankable project even more of a reality, both from the perspective of the cities, but also from the perspective of our financial institutions. I don't know if you have an idea. All ideas are good. As I said, bold ideas today, so don't be shy. Share your thoughts.
Start the dialogue to re-educate the banks towards the asset values of cities. I mean, I think we need to engage into that dialogue. I think that will be a really bold idea to bring the financial world to understand the challenges and the risks also that, and the opportunities actually, which are at local government.
Thank you. Lauren, I give you the floor, but maybe I wanted to just ask if Mr. Shah also would like to share his reflections so that the colleagues can get him on the screen in the meantime. Please.
I would say that in terms of implementation, I want to talk less and do more. I mentioned the scorecard that we're developing, and we're working with about 10 cities to bring projects through that scorecard. I'd love to be even bolder. I know ICLEI is partnering with us on this, and maybe we can bring another 10 or 20 or 30 cities into the conversation and have their projects coming through and being ready by the time COP comes around.
Looking forward to that for sure. Thank you very much. Mr. Shah, would you have also something that you would like to share as an immediate next step that you would like to leave our audience with?
Hello, am I audible?
We can hear you.
Okay. So we have different experience as far as what discussion the panel had in last few minutes. So Gujarat brought its first, for example, I'll give you the example of solar policy. So solar policy first came in 2009. At that time the rates were very high, and today we have latest solar policy of 2021. So meanwhile we had a few more policies in this time of around 12 to 13 years, but gradually it has become more affordable and more competitive. Also the efficiency of panel is increasing in a new scenario where it is also cheaper than what it used to be earlier. So how that scale of economy is achieved is only achieved because of the more and more deployment. So once we will increase the penetration of such things, which is definitely expensive if we look at in at first instance, but when we increase the penetration of the same, it become sort of more viable. Even solar power is in India is now cheaper than the any power which is based out of fossil fuel, whether it is coal or diesel or anything. So that is one thing. Another thing is about the funding. So definitely the state funding is there, but our now most policies are on sort of power purchase agreement based. So capital investment is done through public-private partnership. So new financial models are also emerging in which performance of the system or the outcome is mapped rather than initial investment. So these are some of the successful example. Definitely from infrastructure point of view, government is constantly required to bring money to have, say, power grids and things like that when we talk about basically the SDG7, that is energy access. But this financial model are really lucrative and more participatory when we make it in a sort of single platform base. So all 700 MPanel agency which are working for solar rooftop right now are working on same rate. So those rates, reference rates, are defined by the government, and some subsidy is given by the government. Rest of the investment are being done by the users. So this is a good example of some of the public investment that is getting mobilized in clean power sector.
Thank you very much. So if I can maybe summarize, what I'm hearing is there are good opportunities there, there are great examples already being implemented, and there is no reason for not taking advantage of the great opportunity that the transition can also bring forward. Not only these challenges, but also the opportunities that we have there to use our full potential of renewables on the ground. So thank you very much. Leah, would you like to also share your thoughts?
You asked for bold ideas running up until COP. I personally would love to see at least a solar PV on every single municipal building. That's a start until COP. Bit ambitious, but doable. Second thing is I'd love to see more mayor participation at COP. Third thing, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. I think there are many great ideas out there. We need to connect them, we need to work together, and that's what we're here for.
Thank you very much, and I think that's very much what we've been doing today here. Share good ideas, bold ideas. I want to thank very much all of my amazing panelists, both remotely and here in person with me. Also the audience connected online and here. And with my last and final thank you also to the colleagues who have been supporting the technical organization, in particular Karishma and Sylvia for their support from the back end, but also of course the technical staff here at the pavilion. Thank you for your help. And Rohit, I give you the floor for our final word.
Thanks a lot, Georgia. So I think just to summarize very quickly from all what the panelists said, I think if I hear Lauren, I think she mentioned a very important point of the gap between preparing bankable projects. So this project development and project building is key, and that is where a lot of support and guidance is needed at various levels. And multi-level action with city networks is something that one should look at. Next point. Mr. Shah mentioned about finance, and I think it was very clear from his what he was trying to say is that nobody is financing 100% of any project. Grant financing for any projects have not sustained itself for more than 4 or 5 years. So we need to make sure that the projects are bankable, the investors have the environment which are suitable for them. And of course, look at innovative instruments of financing. People didn't talk about crowdfunding here, but that could be something that works hand in hand with community energy projects. At the moment, what we are looking at, if we go every village, every city, every country year by year, we still won't meet the race. We need rapid transition of energy to renewable energy for all cities, all subnational levels, countries to achieve SDG7. And with that, I would suggest that look at technology, look at policy governance. Today, everybody has a lithium-ion battery in their pockets. There was a time we were looking at big lead-acid batteries. So technology still needs to evolve. Yeah, it needs to be cheaper. It needs to be accessible to the local communities as well. Apart from finance, policies, we need to work at different levels. National governments needs to come and work with the cities at subnational level. And yes, till COP, perhaps what Leah said, we can do that, but this is yet to be seen. We do a lot of talks, we do a lot of target setting and ambition raising, but can we really walk the talk? That's the time now. It's time to act. And I thank you all. And I say, go back home, think about this, and let's act together. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to all who have been watching us, listening to us. Have a good rest of the show. Thank you.